Good afternoon, Lions Nation. I hope you're all having an amazing day. Before we get started, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you never miss any Detroit Lions updates. Your support means a lot and really helps the channel grow. Now, let's get right into today's news. The Detroit Lions are heading into training camp with sky-high expectations, but if we're being honest, there are still several major questions that could end up shaping this entire season. While this roster is talented enough to compete with anyone, there are some positions where the margin for error has become incredibly small, and that's exactly what makes this training camp one of the most important in recent years. The biggest conversation starts in the secondary. Ever since the Lions moved on from Terrion Arnold, one of the most important jobs on the roster has become finding the right player to line up opposite DJ Reed. Right now, the early favorite appears to be Rocky Ya-Sin, but there are plenty of reasons why this situation deserves attention. Last season, he filled a backup role well whenever he was asked to contribute, but being a full-time starter is a completely different challenge. There's also the reality that he has played for 4 different teams in 4 years, which naturally raises questions about consistency and long-term stability. That leaves the Lions with several possible paths. They could trust the players already on the roster and let the competition play itself out during training camp. They could explore free agency if they feel they need another experienced cornerback. They could even wait until NFL roster cuts are finalized to see if another quality defensive back becomes available. At this point, nobody truly knows which direction the organization will choose, and that's exactly why this position battle is one of the biggest storylines to watch over the next few weeks. The concern isn't simply about one starting cornerback either. The entire secondary suddenly feels much thinner than many fans expected just a short time ago. Depth has become a legitimate question, and if injuries begin to pile up again, this unit could be tested much earlier than anyone wants. Training camp will provide the first real opportunity to see whether these concerns are justified or whether some unexpected players are ready to step into larger roles. Speaking of injuries, that might be the single biggest theme surrounding this football team entering camp. Every NFL team deals with injuries, but Detroit has experienced more than enough setbacks over the past couple of seasons. The coaching staff has worked hard to improve depth across multiple positions, especially along the offensive line, because they never want to find themselves forced into emergency situations again. Players like Ben Bartch are expected to return for training camp, which is certainly encouraging, but there are still several players dealing with recovery timelines or lingering health questions. Ennis Rakestraw Jr. has battled injuries since arriving in Detroit. Sione Vaki has also dealt with physical setbacks. Even if these players are available for camp, everyone will be watching closely to see whether they can stay healthy throughout the preseason. Unfortunately, the injury discussion doesn't stop there. Perhaps the biggest question on the entire roster revolves around Kerby Joseph. Right now, nobody truly knows when his knee will be fully healthy. Nobody knows when he'll return to practice. Nobody knows whether he'll be available immediately once the regular season begins. Even the coaching staff doesn't appear to have definitive answers at this stage. That uncertainty creates an enormous challenge because Kerby Joseph isn't just another player in this defense. He's one of the leaders of the secondary and one of the most important playmakers on the roster. Losing a player like that, even temporarily, changes the way the defense operates. Every day that passes without clarity naturally increases the concern among Lions fans. There is at least some optimism regarding Brian Branch. The expectation remains that he will recover, return, and continue developing into one of the defensive leaders this organization believes he can become. But with Kerby Joseph's situation still uncertain, the Lions enter camp knowing they simply need enough healthy defensive backs to keep the secondary competitive while everyone works their way back. Another player facing enormous expectations this summer is Ennis Rakestraw Jr. His story might quietly become one of the most fascinating developments of training camp. Through his first 2 seasons, injuries have prevented him from making the kind of impact the Lions hoped for when they drafted him. This offseason, he reportedly added around 10 pounds of muscle in an effort to better protect his body and improve his durability. Now comes the difficult part. Can he finally stay healthy? Can he translate his talent onto the field consistently? With Terrion Arnold no longer on the roster, the spotlight becomes even brighter. The Lions need someone to emerge, and Rakestraw has an opportunity to completely change the narrative surrounding his young career. There's also another layer to his importance. Many fans have questioned the overall success of Detroit's 2024 draft class. Christian Mahogany has shown encouraging signs and appears to have a legitimate opportunity to earn a starting role, but beyond that, the draft class still has plenty to prove. If Rakestraw finally breaks through, it could completely reshape how people evaluate that entire group. If injuries continue limiting his availability, those questions will only become louder, and while individual players deserve attention, perhaps the biggest concern of all remains the defense itself. New defensive coordinator Kelvin Shepard now inherits a unit filled with both talent and uncertainty. The Lions believe adjustments are coming. Shepard has spoken about studying the film carefully and implementing changes that he believes will improve the defense moving forward. The challenge, however, is significant. There are questions throughout the secondary. There are injury concerns involving key contributors. The linebacker group has changed. There are still discussions about who will consistently generate pressure opposite Aiden Hutchinson. Some fans are also curious whether Detroit will rely more heavily on nickel packages instead of traditional linebacker-heavy looks depending on the opponent. On paper, there are plenty of ideas that sound promising, but training camp is where those ideas finally begin facing real competition. That's when coaches discover whether their plans actually fit the personnel available, and that's when players begin separating themselves from the rest of the roster. As the Lions prepare to open camp, it feels like this defense will receive more attention than any other unit on the team. The offense already has an established identity. The defense still has several important questions waiting to be answered, and every practice could provide another clue about how this group is coming together. So after looking at all these concerns heading into training camp, which one worries you the most? The uncertainty in the secondary, Kirby Joseph's health, Ennis Rakestraw Jr.'s development, or the overall direction of the defense under Kelvin Shepard? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The good news for Detroit is that not everything heading into training camp is surrounded by uncertainty. While the defense carries most of the concerns, there are also several position battles that could make this one of the most entertaining camps the Lions have had in years. In fact, some of these competitions may ultimately strengthen the roster before week 1 even arrives. One of the most interesting battles will take place on the offensive line, specifically at left guard. This is a position where the Lions have invested heavily in depth, and now they have multiple players fighting for one starting job. Christian Mahogany enters camp with plenty of momentum after showing encouraging signs, but nothing has been handed to him. Miles Frazier will have every opportunity to make his own case, while Ben Barch is expected to return healthy enough to compete as well. What makes this battle so exciting isn't simply finding one starter. It's the fact that whoever doesn't win the job could still become an extremely valuable backup during the season. Detroit has learned painful lessons about offensive line injuries over the past few years, and building quality depth has clearly become one of the organization's biggest priorities. Instead of hoping one player stays healthy all season, the Lions now have several legitimate options capable of stepping in if needed. That competition should push everyone involved to play at their highest level. Iron sharpens iron, and by the time training camp comes to an end, Detroit could have one of the deepest offensive lines in the NFL once again. Another position that suddenly becomes much more entertaining is quarterback, specifically the race for the backup role behind Jared Goff. While Goff remains firmly established as the franchise quarterback, the competition behind him could provide one of the biggest storylines throughout the preseason. On one side is Teddy Bridgewater, the experienced veteran who understands NFL defenses and has spent years proving he can step into difficult situations when called upon. His experience alone gives him a strong advantage, especially for a team with championship aspirations that values reliability. On the other side is Luke Altmaier, the undrafted rookie who has reportedly been generating positive attention from the coaching staff. Young quarterbacks often need time to adjust to the speed of the NFL, but training camp and preseason games provide the perfect opportunity to show whether they belong on the final roster. Normally, preseason football isn't something fans get overly excited about, but when there's a genuine quarterback competition taking place, every series suddenly becomes much more meaningful. Every completion, every decision, and every drive can influence how coaches evaluate both players. It gives fans another reason to pay close attention throughout August, because this battle won't simply be decided on reputation alone. The competition at wide receiver is another storyline worth following closely. More specifically, the race for the 5th receiver spot could become one of the toughest battles on the entire roster. At the moment, Dominic Lovett appears to have an early advantage, but there are numerous receivers competing for what is likely only one available position. Every practice rep matters. Every preseason target matters. Every special team snap could determine who ultimately survives final roster cuts. The unfortunate injury to Kendrick Law has opened the door for someone else to seize that opportunity. While nobody wanted to see an injury we create that situation, football is often about being ready when an opportunity presents itself. Several young receivers now have a chance to prove they deserve a place on the final 53-man roster. These kinds of competitions often produce some of the biggest surprises every summer. Unknown players suddenly begin making difficult catches, earning trust from the coaching staff, and forcing the organization into difficult roster decisions. Fans should expect that battle to remain competitive until the very end of training camp. Another fascinating competition is developing at linebacker between Malcolm Rodriguez and Jimmy Rolder. Entering camp, Malcolm Rodriguez may still be viewed as the favorite because of his experience within the system, but Jimmy Rolder has quietly been building momentum. Throughout offseason workouts, he reportedly made several impressive plays, including recording 2 interceptions during minicamp and organized team activities. Coaches and teammates have taken notice, and his development has become one of the more encouraging stories on the defensive side of the football. Even if Rodriguez begins the season ahead on the depth chart, Rolder appears to be positioning himself for a much larger role moving forward. Healthy competition at linebacker can only benefit the defense, especially for a coordinator looking to establish a more consistent identity this season. Finally, one of the most important defensive competitions could take place at safety, particularly if Kirby Joseph isn't immediately